Hi Year 9s, it's Miss Bond here. I'm going to be doing the next 2 lessons with you for an Inspector course. So we're following on from what Miss Purcell has been doing with you this week. Today we're going to be looking at tension in the play so far. For your Do It Now, I just want you to have a think about the relationship between Gerald and Sheila and how has it evolved and changed since the beginning of the play to up until now, where we are in Act 2. For the challenge, I want you to think about who is calling the shots and what might Priestley be suggesting here about the role of women. So you can do this as a timeline, or you can do this as a small paragraph if you wish. So just pause the video here and do it now for 5 minutes. We're going to be looking at how to understand how a writer builds tension to be able to respond to the ideas presented in a text. And we're going to do this by reading through an extract from where we're up in Act 2 up until the end of the scene, the end of Act 2, and then we're going to be analysing it. So what do we mean by tension? Just pause the video here and have a think. You can write 1 or 2 sentences if you like on what you think tension is. Tension is growing a sense of expectation within the drama, a feeling that the story is building up towards something exciting. What tense moments can you think of that we've had in the play so far up until where we are halfway through Act 2? Pause the video here and just write a quick list of the tense moments that you can think of. So you might have got the same as me, you might have some different, that's fine. You can add these ones onto your list. In Act 1 so far, we've had when Sheila, in the very beginning, says to Gerald, "Yes, except for all last summer when you never came near me and I wondered what had happened to you." So we know that some tension is building between Sheila and Gerald. There's tension when the inspector first arrives. There's tension in the interrogation of Burling. And with the photograph, we know the detective is being very careful of who he shows the photo of Eva Smith to and who he doesn't. So far, only Burling and Sheila have seen it. Then we have the interrogation of Sheila. We have Burling saying, "You didn't just come here to see me then." We know there's tension building there as he's suggesting he's not the only one at fault. Then in Act 2, we've got the interrogation of Gerald, which is where we're at the moment. A few words I want to go through before we start reading through the rest of Act 2. Heirs. So this is said twice in the bit that we're going to be reading. The first is by Sheila, and the second is by Mrs. Burling talking about Eva Smith. So heirs means to act in a way that you think you're better than others. Queer in this context means strange or unusual. Impertinence means a lack of respect or rudeness, which is said by Mrs. Burling, and then Mr. Burling says impudence, which is very similar to impertinence. And scruples is having a sense of right and wrong. So Mrs. Burling says, talking about Eva Smith, she uses the word scruples. So you can just write these words down, or and the definition if you don't know these words already. So just pause the video here. So we're going to start from where you left off with Mrs. Purcell. In the audio, Mrs. Burling doesn't actually say this first line. Well, really, I don't know. I think we've just about come to an end of this wretched business. But I've included it in here because it is key to showing her character. We know Mr. Burling has referred to Eva Smith as that wretched girl before, so she's using the same kind of vocabulary, so this is key. And as Mrs. Purcell said before, when you're quoting, you need to quote from the PDF version of the text that I've attached to the PowerPoint to your class charts lessons and the ones that you have in class, not from the audio. So we're going to listen now. I'm going to play the audio and you need to be reading along. And then we're going to answer some questions on the text afterwards.
You know, Inspector, you never showed him that photograph of her.
It wasn't necessary.
You have a photograph of this girl?
Yes. I think you'd better take a look at it. You recognize her?
No.
I can't believe she could have changed so much.
I don't understand you.
You're not telling me the truth.
I beg you. Your pardon?
Look here, Inspector, I'm not going to have this. You'll apologise at once.
For doing my duty?
For being so offensive about it. I'm a public man.
Public men, Mr. Burling, have responsibilities as well as privileges.
Possibly, but you weren't asked to come here to talk to me about my responsibilities.
Let's hope not, though I'm beginning to wonder.
Does that mean anything, Sheila?
That we've no excuse now for putting on airs, and that if we've any sense we won't try. Father threw this girl out because she asked for decent wages. I pushed her further out, right into the street, just because she was pretty. Gerald set her up as his mistress and then dropped her when it suited him, and now you're pretending you don't recognise her from that photograph. And if you're not telling the truth, why should the Inspector apologise? Can't you see, Mother, you're making it worse?
Oh, it was the door again.
Gerald must have come back.
Unless your son has just gone out.
I'll see.
Mrs. Burling, you're a prominent member of the Brumley Women's Charity Organisation.
Go on, Mother. You might as well admit it. Yes, she is. Why?
It's an organisation to which women in distress can appeal for help. Isn't that so?
We've done a great deal of useful work in helping deserving cases.
You were in the chair of the interviewing committee 2 weeks ago, were you not?
And if I was, what business is it of yours?
Mrs. Burling.
It must have been Eric we heard go out.
Eric? Where can he have gone to?
Can't imagine. But he was excitable, queer moods, and even though we don't need him here...
We do need him here, and if he's not back soon, I shall have to go and find him.
Why?
I'll explain that when you've answered my questions.
Is there any reason why my questions from you, Inspector?
Yes, a very good reason. You remember that Mr. Croft told us that he hadn't spoken to or seen Eva Smith since last September. But Mrs. Burling spoke to and saw her only 2 weeks ago.
Mother!
Is this true?
Yes, quite true.
She appealed to your organisation for help?
Yes.
Not as Eva Smith.
No, nor as Daisy Renton.
As what then?
First, she called herself Mrs. Burling.
Mrs. Burling?
It was gross impertinence. Naturally, that was one of the things that prejudiced me against her case.
I should think so. Damned impudent.
Being prejudiced against her case.
Yes.
And was it owing to your influence as the most prominent member of the committee that help was refused the girl?
Yes. I didn't like her manner. She'd impertinently made use of our name, though she pretended afterwards it just happened to be the first she thought of. She had to admit, after I began questioning her, that the story she told at first about a husband who deserted her was quite false.
Why did she want help?
You know very well why.
I know why she needed help. But as I wasn't there, I don't know what she asked from your committee.
I don't think we need to discuss it.
Mrs. Burling.
If you think you can bring any pressure to bear upon me, Inspector, you're quite mistaken. Unlike the other three, I did nothing I'm ashamed of or that won't bear investigation. The girl made a claim for assistance. I wasn't satisfied with it. She seemed to me to be not a good case, and so I used my influence to have it refused. And in spite of what's happened to the girl since, I consider I did my duty. So, if I prefer not to discuss it any further, you have no power to make me change my mind.
Yes, I have.
No, you haven't. simply because I've done nothing wrong, and you know it.
I think you did something terribly wrong. And that you're going to spend the rest of your life regretting it. I wish you'd been with me tonight in the infirmary. You'd have seen.
No, please. I've imagined it enough already.
Then the next time you imagine it, just remember that this girl was going to have a child.
Oh, really?
Oh, horrible. How could she have wanted to kill herself?
Because she'd been turned out and turned down too many times.
Mother, you must have known.
It was because she was going to have a child that she went for assistance to your mother's committee.
Look here. This wasn't Gerald Croft.
Oh,
No. Nothing to do with him.
thank goodness for that. Though I don't know why I should care now.
And you've nothing further to tell me, Mrs. Burling.
I'll tell you what I told her. Go and look for the father of the child. It's his responsibility.
That doesn't make it any the less yours. She came to you for help at a time when no woman could have needed it more. She was alone, friendless, almost penniless, desperate. She needed not only money, but advice, sympathy, friendliness. And you slammed the door in her face.
Cruel and
I
vile.
must say, Sybil, that when this comes out at the inquest, it isn't going to do us much good.
Oh, stop it, both of you. And before you start accusing me of anything, please remember that it wasn't I who had her turned out of her employment, which probably began it all. In the circumstances, I think I was justified. The girl had begun by telling us a pack of lies. Afterwards, when I got at the truth, I discovered that she knew who the father was. So I told her it was her business to make him responsible. If he refused to marry her, and in my opinion he ought to be compelled to, then he must at least support her.
And what did she reply to that?
Oh, she was giving herself ridiculous airs, claiming elaborate fine feelings and scruples that were simply absurd in a girl in her position.
What did she say?
She said that the father was only a youngster and wild and drinking too much. There couldn't be any question of marrying him. It would be wrong for them both. He had given her money, but she didn't want to take any more money from him.
Why didn't she want to take any more money from him?
Oh, some fancy reason. As if a girl of that sort would ever refuse money.
I warn you, you're making it worse for yourself. What reason did she give for not taking any more money?
Her story was that he'd said something one night when he was drunk that gave her the idea that it wasn't his money.
Where had he got it from then?
He'd stolen it.
So she'd come to you for assistance because she didn't want to take stolen money.
That's the story she finally told, after I'd refused to believe her original story, that she was a married woman who'd been deserted by her husband. I didn't see any reason to believe that one story should be any truer than the other. Therefore, you're quite wrong to suppose I shall regret what I did.
But if her story was true, if this boy had been giving her stolen money, then she came to you for help because she wanted to keep this youngster out of any more trouble.
Possibly. But it sounded ridiculous. So I was perfectly justified in advising my committee not to allow her claim for assistance.
You're not even sorry now, when you know what happened to the girl.
I'm sorry she should have come to such a horrible end, but I accept no blame for it.
Who is to blame, then?
First, the girl herself.
For letting Father and me have her chucked out of her jobs.
Secondly, I blame the young man who was the father of the child she was going to have. If, as she said, he didn't belong to her class and was some drunken young idler, then that's all the more reason why he shouldn't escape. He should be made an example of. If the girl's death is due to anybody, then it's due to him.
If her story is true, that he was stealing money,
Then he'd be entirely responsible, because the girl wouldn't have come to us and have been refused assistance if it hadn't been for him.
so he's the chief culprit, anyhow.
Certainly. And he ought to be dealt with very severely.
Mother, stop.
Be quiet, Sheila.
But don't you see,
You're behaving like a hysterical child tonight, Sheila.
Oh,
Inspector, if you take some steps to find this young man and make sure that he's compelled to confess in public his responsibility, instead of staying here asking unnecessary questions, then you really would be doing your duty.
Don't worry, Mrs. Burling. I shall do my duty.
I'm glad to hear it.
No hushing up, eh? Make an example of the young man, eh? Public confession of responsibility.
Certainly. And now, no doubt, you'd like to say good night.
Not yet. I'm waiting.
Waiting for what?
To do my duty.
Now, Mother, don't you see?
But surely... I mean... That's ridiculous.
Inspector, you're not trying to tell us that my boy is mixed up in this?
Yes, then we know what to do, don't we? Mrs. Burling has just told us.
My God. Oh, look here.
I don't believe it. I won't believe it.
Mother, I begged you to stop, but would you...
Okay, and that's the end of Act 2. So we know now that Eric is involved. I want you to have a look back. You can rewind the video if you want to go back through the text, and you can go back through the text on the PDF. As Eric's involvement with Eva Smith and her unborn child becomes clear, we can see how Priestley builds the tension, dropping hints that implicate Eric. The writer gains the audience interest and anticipation during this dramatic end to the second act. So in your books or on your piece of paper or on your computers, I want you to explain how each of these events build tension for the audience, writing your answers in full sentences. For example, the first one, Mr. Burling informs everyone about Eric's departure. This is on page 39 of the PDF. This suggests to the audience that Eric's departure should be noted, hinting that he will be involved shortly. Have a look at the rest of these events and explain how each of them build tension for the audience. We learn that the father of Eva's baby was a heavy drinker, page 43. Sheila tries to warn her mother not to say too much, on page 44. Eric's pale and distressed return at the end of the scene, page 45. The inspector says, severely, "I hope so," when Mr. Burling says that Eric will be returning. That's page 39. The father of Eva Smith's baby is also described as not being of the same social class as her. That's on page 44. And the inspector continues to press Mrs. Burling about the father of the child's responsibilities. That's also on page 44 of the PDF. Pause the video now here and explain how each of these events build tension for the audience. So there's been a lot of things happening in this scene so far, up until the end of Act 2, which is quite dramatic. And there's been a lot of tension, but how has Priestley created and built this tension? I want you to go back through your text and pick out examples of dialogue, action and stage directions that help Priestley to build a dramatic mood in this scene. Plot them onto a graph like I've shown you here. So here we have the climax at the top, very tense, slow tension and calm. So we begin with Mrs. Burling recognises the girl in the photograph, the front door slams, up until Mrs. Burling realises the truth about Eric and the son here, which is the end of the act. Plot onto the graph on your piece of paper, or you can do it on the computer. Pause the video here now. And for the review for the end of the lesson, I want you to think about which moment you think has created the most tension in the play so far and why. Answer in full sentences. Once you've completed your work, send it to your English teacher. Well done for your work today, Year 9. Goodbye.